Okay, podcasters, it's another podcast about podcasting. In this episode, we're talking all about how you can be a guest on podcasts. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Before we get into this episode, I want to tell you a little bit more about Julie Fry, the owner of Your Expert Guest. She helps business owners become guests on podcasts. And so, as we all know, as podcasters, hosting a podcast is a great way to grow our business. But also, being a guest on other people's podcast is just more of how to audience share and just all that podcast goodness. So in this episode, I'm chatting with Julie, and she's going through exactly how you can grow your business and your podcast by leveraging other people's podcasts. Julie works with some incredible women, and that's actually how her and I got connected. She pitched some of her clients to my show, and the pitches were great, and I was like, who is this? And turns out that we don't live very far from each other, both in Seattle. It is just so great knowing her. And I love what she does because being a host of a podcast is amazing and being a guest on a podcast is amazing. So if you can leverage both of them, then you are really in business to grow your business through podcasting. Make sure that you check out all the links in the show notes to connect with myself and Julie. And if you have any questions, let us know. All right, enjoy this episode. And if you become a guest on any podcast, please send me the links. I love listening. Hey, Julie, thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. It's so great talking with you today.
Thank you so much, Haley. I'm really excited to chat with you too.
Yeah, so since we are in the Podcast Cafe, I have a very important question for you. What is your go-to coffee order?
I am so boring. Most of the year, like I'd say 9 months out of the year, it's the Starbucks Nitro cold brew. When it's
Hmm.
really cold, I just do a cappuccino. So, like right now, I'm cappuccino weather.
Okay, I love that. And we're both in
What's
Seattle,
yours?
so,
Yeah,
you
we're
know,
both in Seattle. So, there's so many options. What's yours?
so many options. Mine is a hazelnut latte. I've been
Hmm.
obsessed with them lately. They're just
I
so
have not
good.
had one. I'll have to check that
Yeah.
out.
Awesome. So, Julie, on this podcast, I'm interviewing podcasters, but what you do is very, very close to podcasting. You actually help people become a guest on podcasts, which I think is a great way to dip your toe into podcasting. And it's also a great way to promote your own podcast because it's all about audience sharing and really getting the word out. I built my business all on collaborations, and I know you've done the same. So I'm really excited to get into this whole topic about podcast guesting, collaborations, and really what the audience needs to know about everything.
Yeah, yeah. I am also a big fan of people dipping their toe into podcast guesting before they start a podcast. As you know, it's a lot to produce your own podcast. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we talk to a lot of people that are thinking about starting a podcast or thinking about guesting, and we're a little bit biased, but guesting is a great way to work on your messaging, to build relationships, build referral partnerships, and ultimately drive more revenue for your business.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I honestly think a combination of the two is where it's at because if you have a podcast, you get to host people and obviously get their audience through your promotional piece of podcasting, but then also when you're a guest on other people's, it's nice to be on the other side of the microphone and the one being interviewed. So, I think a combination of the two is nice.
It's perfect. It's perfect. We work with a lot of podcasters who
Hmm.
are using guesting just to grow the reach of their podcast and other reasons, but they really do work super well as
Yeah,
a duplicate strategy.
absolutely. So, how did you get into podcast guesting?
Yeah, so I realized long ago that my superpower was connecting people.
Mm,
Prior to this business, I had a company that was a networking organization for women. And I had that for 7 years. And a lot of what I did on a day to day basis was connect people. So somebody would join the membership, I'd hop on a call with them, find out about their business. I'd be like, oh, my mental Rolodex would just be like, oh, you need to know this person, this person, this person. So I did that all the time, and it was just kind of part of my DNA. And then I decided to sell that business, and the sale finalized in January of 2020. So I was thinking about what to do next and really wanted to have something, whether it was a business or if I went back to corporate, that was involved in that connection piece. And so as the pandemic was starting, I was walking my dog one morning and was listening to a podcast, and I sort of had this light bulb of like, oh wow, I could connect people to podcasts to maintain visibility in their business since the whole world was shutting down and people were freaking out, as a way just to kind of keep things going for people while the world settled and we figured out what was next. So that was really how I started this business.
I love that. What was the first podcast that you were on?
First podcast I was on was in 2014, and it
Oh,
was the Biz
wow.
Chicks podcast. Yeah,
Cool.
hosted by Natalie Ekdahl.
Oh my gosh. And so back then, you obviously didn't have this specific business. What were you
I
talking
did
about on
not.
there?
So that was when I had the networking
Okay.
business. And because we were specific for mom entrepreneurs,
Mm,
I talked about running a business as a mom. So, kind of the challenges of juggling young kids and fitting in all of the things that you need to do as a business owner, and really how it's hard to fit in because you don't really fit in with the stay at home moms and you don't really fit in with the corporate working moms. And
yeah.
so, like, creating a space for all of us crazy entrepreneurial moms.
Very, very cool. I love that. I think around like 2014 is when I started listening to podcasts as
Okay.
well. So maybe I heard you on there. I don't know. The funny thing is, I remember a couple podcasts that I used to listen to, but I told this story in my, I think, second or first episode of the podcast where I had the most boring job and I would literally just listen to podcasts all day long, sitting at my desk. And never did I think it'd bring me to podcasting, but I wish I remembered all of the episodes that I listened to back then because I feel like that's what
Yeah.
definitely brought me to now what I do.
Yeah, yeah. I've definitely cycled through some shows over the years and like then come back to them later.
Yeah.
Like I used to always listen to social media marketing back
Mhm.
in 2014, and then I kind of went away from it, and then I've come back to it occasionally. The very first podcast I ever listened to, like this was in 2009, I want to say, and it was WTF with Mark Maron. I've always loved
Mm.
comedy podcasts.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And so, since you got your start in business podcasting, now
Mhm.
you work with amazing businesswomen. I've interviewed some of your clients on my other show, Employee to Boss. I've had some of your clients on some of my client shows. You
Yep.
really have great women that you're working with, and they always are great to interview.
They are. We feel so lucky that we have just the coolest clients. Yeah, I feel very fortunate. We work with a lot of women service business owners. And so
Mhm.
I know there's a big overlap with Employee to Boss and some of your clients' podcasts. But yeah, we are grateful every day that we get to work with such cool, smart women.
Yeah, and what stands out to me about your clients and just any great podcast guest is they know what they're trying to say and how to say it that's going to build
Hmm.
their authority, bring people to like they have a great call to action, and it's not all about selling. Like Nikki
Yep.
Rausch is a great guest of yours that I was thinking of. I interviewed her on my podcast years ago, and she was recently on
Hmm.
one of my other clients' podcast. And like, she knows what she's saying. And that is just so, it's great for me, the interviewer, but it's also great for her to have those, you know, that credibility building. So I'm curious, what should the audience know about podcast guesting for their business?
Yes. So, and yeah, shout out to Nikki Roush. If you need help with sales, she has a podcast called The Sales Maven, and
Mhm.
it's brilliant. But really, when it comes to guesting, it is very similar with the goals for if you have your own podcast. So, it's an opportunity to network. I've made some amazing relationships through the podcast space. So, when you're guesting on podcasts, you get this really unique opportunity that doesn't exist in many other places to talk one on one with somebody. And like if you go to a conference or if you're at a networking event, like it's hard, you get like these little couple minute snippets with
Mhm.
somebody, right? But, you know, I'm learning more about you through this conversation. You're going to learn more about me. And then, you know, once you hit stop recording, we'll chat for a little bit longer. We'll learn how we can support each other. So there's just not that many opportunities that you get to have that type of relationship building with the host. And so while it can be great for visibility and credibility, authority building, SEO, like revenue, all the things, that is really at the core of what we do is relationships because relationships are what grow businesses. So that's the first thing I want people to know about podcast guesting. It is like a one in a million opportunity for relationship building,
Mhm.
which then can lead to referrals. So when, especially when you know what you want to talk about and you know what you are known for, it just makes you so much easier to refer. And when you have that relationship with podcasters and you stay in touch over time, you can really build a remarkable referral engine for your business. And then lastly, obviously, you know, the outcome that some people do want with their guesting is to drive more revenue. And that's definitely possible with podcast guesting.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I always tell my clients this when I'm helping them start their podcast. One of the first questions I ask is like, what is your goal for this podcast? And the answer I love to hear is just building relationships. And the answer I hate to
Mm-hmm.
hear is, I want to make money from this. And if that's like the number one reason you're starting a podcast or being a guest on podcasts, like it can happen, but also you're gonna burn yourself out if you do, like, 10 podcasts in a row and then get no sales from it, right? You're gonna be like,
Yeah.
"Well, what's happening?" It's
Yeah.
really a slow it can be a slow process. I don't wanna, like, deter anyone from starting a podcast or guest on podcasts, but just like you're saying, Julie, the relationships you build and are able to nurture are way more valuable than going on there and, like, selling, like, buy this, buy this, buy this, right? It's like so different. And so I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on this, but it really is, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And
Yes.
so, whether you're guesting or having your own show, like committing to it and saying, okay, I'm going to do this for a certain period of time. And these are some of the milestones that I want to see along the way, but knowing that, you know, marketing is a long game, really, no matter what you do. So,
Yeah.
I just think this is one of the most fun ways to market your business because it's just
Yeah.
talking, you're talking.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. It's the best way I've grown my business financially, of course, but also in just a fun way, just like you're saying. So I'm curious if we can talk about podcast guesting as an option for podcasters specifically. So,
Mhm.
like we were just saying, you obviously want to let people know what you do, build that authority, and have a call to
Yep.
action. How does that work specifically for your podcasting clients?
Yeah, so we start very much the same way that you do is, you know, what's the goal of why you want to guest on podcasts? And for some of our clients that have podcasts, it's to grow the visibility of their own podcast because their podcast is their number one lead engine.
Mhm.
For other people, it is to build a referral network. For other people, maybe they're launching a book and they're just trying to reach a broader audience. So, those are a few different reasons. And I would also say that when you have your own podcast and you're releasing new episodes, and if you aren't doing anything else to market your show, at some point you're going to plateau. And so by guesting, it enables you to get in front of people that would not have necessarily heard of your show otherwise. So it really is a great way to reach new audiences and then expand the reach of your own show.
Absolutely. What are some ways that your clients or just podcast guests can use that after the interview? Because just like you're saying, if you have a podcast and you don't market it, you can't expect to become top 1%, right? Same with
Yeah.
being a guest on podcasts. If you're a guest and then you tell no one, well, what's the point? So how can we use
Yeah.
that guesting slot to grow our business?
Yeah. Well, just like when you host your own podcast, you get all of this opportunity for amazing content from it, right? So I know you do this for your clients where you're creating blog posts and social media posts and videos. You can do the same thing with your guest appearances. And that's something that we do for our clients as well. They have the option to, create content from their podcast interviews. Most hosts are really happy to share the video with you, knowing that you're going to use that to promote the show. So our team members definitely work with hosts to give them a heads up that we're requesting that for the guest. But if you're doing it on your own, that's something that you can just tell the host beforehand, like, hey, I'm going to, use a lot of the content from this interview in my social media marketing. Is it cool if you share the footage with me?
Mhm.
And most hosts are more than happy to do that. So you can get so much more mileage and create, you know, 20, 30, 40 pieces of content from one show and
Yeah.
continue to get more mileage from that podcast interview.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know whenever I have a guest on or I'm helping my clients send the episode to their guest, I always send the edited version. I would never send the raw version. People don't need to know what this looks
Yeah.
like before it's
No, no.
edited. Editing is important, and so
Yes.
send the edited version, graphics, embed code, all of those things, so then they can put it on their website and just put it all over social media. But I'd love to hear maybe some case studies from either yourself or your clients that have done this because it is important. This promotional piece, having a great
Mhm.
episode is great, but then the promotional piece is the most important part.
Yeah, definitely. And there are some unconventional ways that you can use your podcast interviews too. We have one client who we're taking the episode and converting it into a blog post, social media, video. But another thing that she's doing is using it in her discovery calls. So when she has a discovery call with somebody, she'll give them homework and tell them to listen to this specific episode where I talk about money coaching. She's a money coach. And so it helps her determine if the client is a good fit and also for the client to determine if they'll be a good fit working together. So that's just a sidebar of another way you can use your podcasts. But yeah, we have an attorney right now that we're working with and we're repurposing some of her episodes. It just takes the whole work of content creation off your plate. Like it's sort of like the mental load of being a woman, there's just so much that we're always thinking about and doing. When you are thinking about marketing your business, like make it easier on yourself and don't give yourself one more thing that you need to do. Like you've already got the content from your podcast interview. So you can use that and have somebody else create it for you so that you don't have to worry about it. And then you've got that visibility machine working for you.
Absolutely. And so that's a great part to mention. And that's a really cool way that your client is using her podcast. That's really smart. At the base of all of this, though, is having a great interview and really saying what you need to say in the
Mhm.
episode. Can you walk us through maybe key steps to having a great episode or what a podcast episode needs to have as you being the guest?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So, some things to think about is when we're working with clients, one of the steps that we do is really coming up with what are your interview topics? Like anybody can get interviewed on a podcast and just talk, but at the end of it, you really want to have the listener come away with something that is helpful for them. So, we help our clients come up with what are going to be the best topics for you to have conversations about, knowing that your end goal is to sell more books or
Mhm.
drive more people to your podcast. And then we'll break it down and even come up with like talking points for them, so that they know what the key points that they want to share on that interview are. And we share that with the host too, so that they're both aligned. And in some cases, the conversation might go a different way. And as a good guest, you kind of have to be quick on your feet and able to pivot. Sometimes that can even mean getting some media training. But at the end of the day, your goal is really just, you have a few key points that you want to get across. And so practicing on doing that through storytelling, through sharing how you work with your clients, and then having a really good call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for me, what I've noticed when it comes to call to action, since I do interview so many people on this podcast and my other podcast, is sometimes people have too many call to actions. Can you talk a little
Yes.
bit on that? Because, like, when someone says, "Oh, you could find me on X, but I don't really post," I'm like, then why say it? You know?
I know. I know. Yeah, when we're onboarding a client, we say, "Pick one."
Mhm.
Pick one.
Pick
The
one,
host is
yes.
gonna ask you for a list of links where people can find you. They're gonna ask you for your website and your social media, and if you have a free resource. So don't worry about saying all of those. They will be available in the show notes, but people are busy, and a confused mind doesn't take action. So give them one thing to do. Like,
Mhm.
you want them to listen to your podcast, talk about your podcast in the interview. And then at the end of the interview, I invite you to come check out, your expert guest or whatever the podcast is. But pick one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Because if it's a long list, it's like so for me, I always pick Instagram. That's where I'm most active. That's where you can find
Hmm.
all of my links. That's what I pick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know sometimes I'll interview people and I'm like, should I do them a favor and just edit that out? But I don't
Oh.
because that's not very nice of me.
Yeah. And lately, we have been coaching clients that are active on LinkedIn to say LinkedIn,
Yeah.
because only 2% of the people on LinkedIn actually post. And so,
Mm.
if you are posting your thought leadership, you have a really high likelihood of showing up in the people that you're connected to's feed. And so, that we're finding is a good way for people to kind of stay more visible with people after they hear their podcast interview.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know that stat. I'll have to start posting more on LinkedIn. I think I'm part of the 98% that doesn't post. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of lurkers there.
yeah. So, let's talk about for you when you go on podcasts. I'm sure there's things that you kind of have a checklist of what you want to hit on. And
Mhm.
you've done that through experience, you've done that through just being a podcast on so many shows over the past, what, 10, 11 years so far? So which is amazing. I love that, by the way. I
Yeah.
wasn't on a podcast until 2018, and it was my
Okay.
own, and so I'm a
Gotcha.
I'm you're ahead of me, Julie. I love that.
Not that much. I wasn't a guest on that many podcasts, like 2013 to 2020. It was really like 2020. That's when I
Got it.
actively started guesting intentionally.
Yeah, intentionally, for sure. So you have that list in your head, I'm sure, of what you wanna hit on before the interview is over. How do you
Yep.
create that list, and how do you coach your clients to also creating that list?
Yeah. So again, that kind of goes back to thinking about your why, what's your goal with guesting, coming to what it is that you're going to talk about, and what are those 3 to 5 kind of key points that you want to showcase, either through stories about you or stories about your clients.
Mhm.
And so for some clients, we'll say, like, write it down before the interview, like, get yourself in that mindset space of really serving an audience and thinking about, if you were listening and you wanted to learn something, what are the things you really want to learn about, so that you're kind of approaching it from the standpoint of the listener. For our more seasoned clients, that it's second nature, they kind of just don't need that. But we provide our clients with a backgrounder for each podcast before they guest. And it does have, like, here's what you're talking about. Here's the key points that you want to make. So we kind of provide that level. But if you're doing it yourself, you can just make some notes beforehand, and refer to that before you go on the podcast, and you should be good. But one thing too, kind of coming back to that call to action, especially if you create something specific for each show that you go on, like put it on a sticky note and put it on your monitor so that you
Mm.
remember what the right call to action is. We've seen people either forget or provide the wrong link. So if you've got a lot of different calls to action, just put it on your monitor so you see it.
That's a great tip. That's a really great tip. Thanks for sharing that. So I know a lot of the audience is probably thinking right now, okay, great. How do I get on podcasts? And so, you could work with you, Julie, or can you walk us through how to find podcasts to be on?
One, use your network. So once you've decided I want to be on podcasts, tell your network. Tell them, like in a quick one sentence, what you do and who you do it for, and who do you know that hosts a podcast with this audience. That's probably the easiest and most efficient way to do it. There are lots of Facebook groups and online platforms for podcast host and guest matchmaking. So if
Mhm.
you just, Google podcast guest matchmaking, that will pull up a list of those. You could take a course to find out really kind of best practices of preparing to be a guest, what to do before, during, and after your interview. There's several different courses that you could take. You can, and so then you're doing it yourself. We also provide a service where we will research a list of great fit shows for you, because researching the shows is really the most labor intensive piece.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
takes a lot of time. So
Yeah.
that's something that we do that's a big time saver for clients. And then we tell them exactly how to pitch the show. So you can do that. You can hire an agency, you can hire an assistant. One piece of advice, if you are hiring it out, ask them how they pitch their clients and ask to see a sample pitch. Is that's the number one thing I hear hosts complain about, is that the pitches that they receive are not specific to their show. They get a lot of spammy kind of spray and pray pitches that
Mhm.
they're just automatically throwing away. And when your brand is associated with somebody that's doing that, it reflects poorly on your brand. So I definitely do that piece of due diligence before you hire somebody.
I agree. I have been getting pitched by this one guy for all of his
Oh,
clients,
no.
and it's like, I don't know, it's embarrassing what he's sending. It's actually the craziest pitches. I'll have to show them to you, Julie, they're crazy.
Oh, please. Please.
But the pitches I
Yeah, I
get
mean,
from
they're
you and your
probably,
team are great.
yeah, I actually was just talking to another host yesterday. She's a parenting coach, and she got pitched by somebody who's the air frying queen. It's like, are you serious? I mean, so maybe I could make that connection if you're pitching like, hey, busy mom, here's like
Mhm,
some ideas
mhm.
to save time when you're cooking, but don't lead with that you're the air frying queen, right?
Yeah,
Like that
right.
just automatically gets deleted. So yeah, I
Yeah,
would love to see some of your crazy pitches.
yeah,
And then
totally.
what do you do with, do you just like let them keep coming, or do you say, "Hey, please take me off your list," or do you reiterate like, "This is the type of client that I'm looking for," or yeah, like what do you do when you get pitches like that?
I think it depends how crazy the pitch is. If it's really crazy, I'll
Mhm.
ignore it. If they keep coming
Okay.
at me, I'll tell them, like, "Not interested, thanks." Or if
Uh-huh.
it is, like, a nice pitch, but it's just someone that isn't my ideal audience, but, like, the pitch is, like, well thought out, then I'm like, "Hey, this is actually who I like to interview, like, if you have anyone that matches." So I think it does depend on
Gotcha.
how I'm approached, but yeah, the pitches I get from your team are always aligned, and they are also great and personalized, so thank you for that.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we do a good job with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you wanna share about podcast guesting before we get into our rapid fire section?
Let's see. Do you find that your clients are sometimes hesitant to reach out to hosts about guesting on other shows? Is there any sort of mindset issues that they have?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So that's something that I see too, especially people that are newer or maybe haven't spoken as much for their
Mhm,
business. And so advice, if you're feeling anxious about it, is just recognize that there are millions of podcasts that are interview format. They're looking for guests to interview that have great information to share. So you're actually doing the host a favor by reaching out and offering yourself as a guest. So just a little mind trick that you can play with yourself, that instead of feeling like, oh, I'm being salesy or pushy, you're actually helping them and doing them a favor by reaching out, as long as you're doing it in an authentic, kind of servant minded way of helping their audience.
Absolutely. That's such a good point because my podcasts, both this one and Employee to Boss, wouldn't run without having guests. And so it is nice
Hmm.
when people reach out to be a guest on here because then I don't have to do all of the research, right? So that
Yeah.
is a real,
Yeah.
like, I love it when people pitch themselves to me. I, yeah, it saves me a lot of time. And so that is a really good point. Like, it's not annoying, it actually helps me.
Yes, yes. And so I'm trying to evangelize that for the people that just feel like, oh, I can't do that. That's
Yeah.
just, I'm putting myself out there. I can't. You can't. If people are buying something from your business, then you have value to share on a podcast.
Absolutely. Oh, that's such a good point. That's a great way to end that and get into our rapid fire section. So thanks for
Cool.
sharing that mindset
You
tip. That's
bet.
really, really a good one. Awesome. So, Julia, I have 8 questions for you in our rapid fire. So let's go ahead and get started. You might have answered this one already, but what's the first podcast that you ever listened to?
Oh, yeah. It's WTF with Mark Marin.
I love that. I'm going to have to go check that out after this.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
So
it's still active, but it's
that'd
a
be
good one.
cool.
Like, go back and listen to the old episodes. He's funny.
I'll definitely put that in the show notes for sure. So my next question is what's your favorite genre of podcasting besides your own that you work in, which I would say is like business?
Business, yeah, definitely comedy. So I feel
Mhm.
like we all need more laughter and humor in our lives. And so my go to is always comedy.
Yeah, very cool. Do you have a comedy podcast you recommend everyone listen to?
My personal favorite is Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. He also does Conan Needs a Fan, where fans will apply to be on the show. And those conversations are just so hilarious. He's so intelligent, like he went to Harvard, but he's really self depreciating and silly and goofy. So it's
Mhm.
just a nice mix. So that's one of my favorites. I
Cool.
also like Smartless and Fly on the Wall, which
Mhm.
is Dana Carvey and David Spade.
Very cool. Okay, awesome.
We need
I love
more
that.
women comedians. I'm
Yeah.
realizing those are all dudes, so I'll make that a goal of mine to get more women comedian podcasters in my rotation.
Yes. Yes, I love that. So that might go into my next question. I normally ask my guests if they have a dream podcast guest, but do you have a dream podcast client, like someone that you would love to help in your business?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, gosh, I mean, and see, look at me with my mindset thing. I'm like, oh, Tina Fey, but she's got a publicist. So, yeah, that's a hard one because I always go to like, oh, they've already got somebody. They don't need somebody
Mm,
like me. But
they do need you,
You
Julie.
know, there is a woman, her name is Amy Nelson, and I don't know if you remember The Riveter. It was a co-working studios here in Seattle, and she actually had many throughout the country,
Mm,
and she had to close it down during COVID. But she has a fascinating story, and now she's taken that business and put it online called the Riveter School. But I'd love to work with her. She's somebody that I would be honored to represent.
very cool.
Just
Okay, I'm
gonna
gonna
put
have
that out
to.
there, Amy
Yeah.
Nelson.
Yes, Amy Nelson, if you're listening, go connect with Julie. I'm gonna have to look her up. I moved to Seattle during the pandemic, so it probably was already closed during that time, but
Gotcha. Okay.
that's cool. I think we do need more co-working studios here. That's a dream of mine to start
We
one. I would love that.
really? See, I kind of bounce around like, oh, I'd love to open a co-working space. And yeah, I think they're super valuable and we
They
need
are.
more of them.
My next question for you is what's your favorite podcast listening platform?
Oh, I'm an Apple Podcast girl.
Do you have any podcast pet peeves as a listener?
I do. I do. So there are some podcasts that I listen to every week, and one in particular will go back and forth between solo episodes and interviews. And occasionally, her interview podcasts, she will read the guest bio. And if that guest bio is more than like 3 to 5 sentences long, I'm like, what are you doing? Just stop it. There was one that she read, and the guy's bio was legit like 3 minutes long. And I just was like, just stop. I mean, I stopped. I stopped listening to the podcast and I moved on
Mhm.
to something else.
Yeah.
So please don't do that. When you send your bio, make it short.
Yes.
Make it short.
Yeah, make your bio short, make your links short. I mean, you'll have a chance to impress your audience in the episode. You don't have to impress them in your bio.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
say what you do and then show them through the episode your expertise.
Yeah, we don't need to know where you went to grade school, middle school, high school, undergrad, grad, master's, PhD. We don't need to know
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah. No. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Thank you. What's the best advice you've received about podcasting or podcast guesting?
Yeah, this is a good one. I feel like it's always changing too, just as the format becomes more established. So I think the best piece of advice that I have gotten, at least around guesting in particular, is just to be yourself. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. Don't feign expertise when you don't have it. People relate to people because we're all humans and we all have this shared experience of life.
Mhm.
And don't be afraid to talk about hard things, vulnerable things, hard stuff that you've gone through. Even if it's a business podcast and it has nothing to do with your business. Like some of the most powerful interviews that I've had is when I share about, depression or, family stuff that has been hard. It's a really unique way to connect with people, and the more kind of real that you are, I think it will have the right people lean in, the right people lean away. You want to
Yeah,
use podcasting to attract more of the right people.
absolutely. That's really beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Julie. I have one last
Yeah.
question for you. What is the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself through podcast guesting?
That I don't hate the sound of my own voice.
Yes, yes. I have strong feelings about people hating their own voice. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's
again, like the first time I was interviewed on a podcast, I was kind of surprised that like I kind of like the way I sound. And so whenever I have clients say, "Oh, I never listen to any podcast interviews," it hurts my heart a little bit because
mhm.
I think there's a lot of learning that you can get from listening to your interviews, but we all have beautiful voices and we have a lot to say and we should share our voices freely. So that surprised me about myself that I actually liked hearing my voice.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, Julie, this has been so much fun chatting all about podcast guesting. Where can the audience come and connect with you?
Check us out at yourexpertguest.com. And from there, you can book a call if you want to chat about podcast guesting and how it could work in your business.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I'll put that link in the show notes. I've had so much fun chatting with you.
Me too. Thanks so much, Haley.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind the scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.